Alexander Carter had everything a young man could dream of: a sprawling mansion, private jets, and access to the world's most exclusive circles. Yet, he lacked the one thing his father had always valued: discipline. Richard Carter, founder of Carter Industries, had built his empire brick by brick, enduring sleepless nights and countless sacrifices. He often told Alexander, "The weight of wealth is heavy, son. If you don't learn to carry it, it will crush you." But Alexander never listened. While Richard toiled in boardrooms and factories, Alexander was a fixture on social media, flaunting his father's success like a trophy. "Work is for people who don't have money," he'd joke, brushing off his father's insistence that he at least learn the basics of the business. It was a cold December evening when tragedy struck. Richard suffered a fatal heart attack during a late-night meeting. The news came as a shock to Alexander, but his grief was quickly overshadowed by the avalanche of responsibilities that came his way. As his father's only heir, Alexander inherited not just the company, but also its problems. The Carter Industries board, once fiercely loyal to Richard, saw Alexander as an incompetent playboy. Their initial attempts to guide him were met with indifference. "I'll hire people to handle it," he said dismissively, choosing instead to attend yacht parties and exotic getaways. Without Richard's leadership, the company faltered. Critical contracts were lost, and poor financial decisions led to massive losses. The media savaged Alexander, dubbing him the billionaire blunder. Alexander's personal life began to unravel alongside his professional one. The lavish parties became less frequent as his wealth dwindled. His so-called friends, who once surrounded him in good times, disappeared when the invitations stopped coming. Creditors came knocking, and soon his prized possessions were auctioned off to cover debts. He moved from his luxurious penthouse to a rundown apartment in the city's outskirts. For the first time in his life, Alexander experienced the sting of poverty. He walked past Carter Industries headquarters one day, now owned by another corporation, and felt a pang of regret. Desperate for answers, Alexander dug through his father's old belongings and stumbled upon a letter Richard had written but never sent. "My dearest Alexander, wealth is fleeting, but knowledge and integrity last a lifetime. I built this empire for you, not to give you an easy life, but to provide you with a platform to achieve greatness. I hope one day you'll..." After losing everything, Alexander Carter faced a life he never imagined. One without wealth, security, or power. Stripped of his privilege, he set out on a desperate journey to find help. But what he didn't know was that life had far more brutal lessons waiting for him. Alexander's first stop was at the mansion of his childhood friend, Lucas Fitzgerald. The two had grown up together, racing luxury cars and throwing wild parties. Lucas greeted him warmly, but hesitated when Alexander explained his predicament. "Alex, man, I wish I could help, but I'm in a tight spot myself." "You know how it is," Lucas said, leaning casually against his marble fireplace. Alexander could see the lie in his friend's eyes, but chose not to press. "Yeah, I get it," he mumbled, forcing a smile. As he left, he overheard Lucas's laughter echoing through the grand halls, a bitter reminder of his own downfall. Still hopeful, Alexander tried Cassandra, a glamorous socialite who had once been the life of his parties. "Oh, Alex, darling," she cooed, sipping champagne on her balcony. "You should have planned better. You know how fragile these..." Her condescension stung, but what cut deeper was the way she dismissed him with a wave of her hand, as if he were a waiter, not someone she'd once called a friend. After days of rejection, Alexander's desperation drove him to Nathan, a former business associate. Nathan had always been envious of Alexander's position and wealth. Now, seeing him at rock bottom, Nathan saw an opportunity. "I'll help you, Alex," Nathan said, flashing a grin. "But there's a condition. You'll need to sign over the rights to the last piece of your father's estate, the small vineyard in Tuscany." Alexander's heart sank. The vineyard wasn't worth much in monetary terms, but it was his father's favorite retreat, a place where they'd shared rare moments of peace. "Nathan, that vineyard is all I have left of him," Alexander pleaded. "Take it or leave it," Nathan said coldly. Against his better judgment, Alexander signed the papers, hoping Nathan's promise of financial assistance would be his salvation. But as soon as the ink dried, Nathan disappeared, leaving Alexander with nothing but regret. With no money, no friends, and no family to turn to, Alexander found himself wandering the city streets. His once polished appearance was replaced by tattered clothes and an unshaven face. He slept in alleyways, ate scraps from dumpsters, and endured the cold, biting winds of winter. One night, as he huddled near a subway grate for warmth, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Sarah, a former employee at Carter Industries. She had been a low-level intern, someone Alexander had barely noticed during his time as CEO. "Alexander," she said, stopping in her tracks. Her tone was a mix of shock and pity. I just need a little help," he stammered, unable to meet her gaze. Sarah didn't hesitate. She bought him a meal and gave him a pair of gloves. "I don't have much, but you helped me once when I needed an internship. It's the least I can do," she said. Her kindness brought tears to Alexander's eyes. He realized that while he had spent years ignoring the struggles of others, these very people were now showing him the compassion he had never offered. Not everyone Alexander met was as kind as Sarah. Late one night, while searching for a place to sleep, he wandered into a dangerous part of town. A group of men approached him, their intentions clear from their sneering faces. "Hey, rich boy," one of them jeered. "What's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" "I don't want any trouble," Alexander said, backing away. But trouble found him anyway. The men cornered him, demanding money he didn't have. When he couldn't deliver, they beat him and took the threadbare jacket he was wearing. As he lay on the cold ground, bruised and bleeding, Alexander thought about how far he had fallen. Yet, in that moment of pain, he also felt a spark of defiance. "This can't be the end," he muttered to himself, clutching his side as he struggled to his feet. Weeks later, Alexander stumbled upon an old community shelter run by none other than Mr. Lawson, a janitor who had worked at Carter Industries for decades. The man had retired with little fanfare, but he remembered Alexander. "Mr. Carter, is that really you?" Lawson asked, shocked to see the man who had once ruled an empire now reduced to this. Alexander nodded, too ashamed to speak. "Come inside," Lawson said, leading him into the warmth of the shelter. Lawson gave him a place to sleep and a hot meal. But more importantly, he gave Alexander a dose of hard truth. "You've hit rock bottom, son," Lawson said, sitting across from him. "But rock bottom can be the best foundation to rebuild your life. Your father was a good man. Don't let his legacy die with you." Those words resonated deeply with Alexander. For the first time, he felt the stirrings of hope and determination. Just as Alexander began to piece his life together, he received an anonymous letter. "Alexander Carter, you've faced the consequences of your arrogance, but you still have potential. Meet me at the old vineyard in Tuscany. If you're willing to work, I can help you rebuild. Not just your wealth, but your character." The letter was unsigned, but the invitation was intriguing. With nothing left to lose, Alexander decided to take the journey, hoping it might be the start of his redemption. Understand that true success lies in building something meaningful with your own hands. The words pierced Alexander's heart. He realized that his father's wealth had been both a blessing and a curse, shielding him from the struggles that could have shaped him. Determined to change, Alexander sought out George Stanford, his father's former mentor and one of the few people who hadn't abandoned him. George agreed to help, but only on one condition: Alexander would start from the bottom. "No handouts," George said firmly. "If you want to rise, you'll have to climb." Alexander took a job as a junior clerk in a small logistics company. The pay was meager, and the work was grueling. He was mocked by former acquaintances who couldn't believe the once wealthy heir was now working a 9-to-5 job. But Alexander kept his head down and focused. Over time, he began to see the value in hard work and humility. He learned about supply chains, negotiations, and managing people. Slowly but surely, he began to apply the lessons to his own vision. With a small loan from George, Alexander launched a modest logistics startup. It wasn't flashy, but it was his. He treated his employees with respect, drawing from the lessons of his father's leadership. The company grew steadily, gaining a reputation for reliability and innovation. Years later, Alexander stood on the stage at a business summit, addressing an audience about his journey. He no longer wore the designer suits of his past, but a simple, well-fitted blazer. "I lost everything because I didn't value what I had," he admitted. "But losing it all taught me the importance of earning my place in the world. My father gave me a foundation, but it was up to me to build on it." Though Alexander could never reclaim the grandeur of Carter Industries, he had built a life of purpose and integrity. His story became a beacon for others, a reminder that wealth without wisdom is a burden, not a blessing. In his heart, he carried his father's legacy, not as a shadow, but as a guiding light for a future he could finally call his own. Please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.